Welcome everyone to the Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group Meetup for Thursday, November 2022. This is the penultimate meetup of the year. We're going to be doing one more in a couple of weeks, and then we're going to take December off. And for today, we've got Melissa is back to present for us. Before we do that, though, let me just go and quickly clear through the normal sponsor slide decks here. So we'll jump past that one. I'd like to thank SkillWave, my learning management company that we run with Matt Allington to teach people how to work with Power Query and Power Pivot and DAX and all kinds of good stuff around Power BI and Excel. If you are interested in some really good learning on how to work with Power Query and data models, you should definitely check us out. Excel Guru is my company, and we are the producer as well of Monkey Tools. Hey, Christian, by the way, I saw your post this morning on LinkedIn saying how much you love Query Sleuth in Monkey Tools. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. If you haven't checked out Monkey Tools, you should definitely do so. Our next tracks that we are meetups that we have coming up, our Power BI track on Thursday, November 17th. We've got Scott Juro is going to be joining me from like literally across the water. I can see this guy's house from my house across the strait here. He's going to be talking about Power FX, what it is and where it can be used. And then we'll announce our Excel and Power BI tracks for 2023 sometime before they actually happen. So there'll be some new stuff coming up next year. The meetup today will be recorded, and I am just checking that the recording is actually on, and I can see that it is on after my debacle from last time around. So the recording is active. This will be posted on our YouTube channel within 48 hours at our SkillWave YouTube channel. The links for all of these things, of course, are already posted on the meetup site. You just got to give me a little bit of time to produce it before I go and get it out there. But I'll let you know through meetup when that is actually live. I want to just throw out a quick hat tip to Monkey Shorts. If you're interested in quick, 3.5 minute episodes of doing cool stuff here, you can check out our Monkey Shorts programs on our SkillWave YouTube channel. Today we worked with merging multiple rows to a single cell. I've got actually something that's really cool coming up next week that sort of builds on this a little bit, but I had to get that level out there first. And we actually talked about, hang on, that was it. Merging multiple rows. This is an entire column and flipping it into a single data point. So kind of a cool little thing that's going on there. So you should definitely check that one out. And we've got Monkey Shorts, as I say, they're released weekly with new quick tips. If you're interested in taking advantage of some of the SkillWave training, you should definitely sign up for our newsletter because, of course, we've got something cooking for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We're going to be releasing all of that through the newsletter. So if you're not on the SkillWave newsletter, please sign up and check it out and make sure that that you are in the know when the specials come down. The last thing I'm going to say is that we are still working on our 2023 lineup for the Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group sessions. If you have a topic or know someone you think would be a fantastic presenter, please, submit something to us. Let us know because we're always looking to add new presenters to our lineup. We're looking forward to fleshing you out with some cool sessions in 2023. And on that note, that's the end of my slides. Melissa, I'm going to turn the thing over to you and let's talk Power Query.
Yeah, let's do. I'll share my screen.
All right.
There we go.
Excellent. We can see it. We are good to go.
Awesome. Great.
Cool. And I'll just say, Melissa, before you dive into this one, as normal, I'm going to moderate the chat for Melissa, so we'll break in when there's logical points with your questions. So please feel free to ask your questions, and then we'll get them going once Melissa's ready for them after each section.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Melissa. I'm an enterprise DNA expert. That's a title that can be awarded to members for their contributions to the community, in my case by providing support on their forum. To date, I've also created 2 courses on Power Query for Enterprise DNA, which both can be accessed through their learning platform. The first covers fundamentals, and the second focuses on practical application and problem solving. That's a thing that I really, really enjoy. I'm currently in the process of finalizing a 3rd course, which hopefully will be released before the end of the year or maybe early 2023. Today, we'll be exploring concepts and techniques in M by working through some challenges. So if you want to master M and advance your Power Query skills, I highly recommend taking part in those. For a daily dose, just look for the hashtag Excel Challenge or Power Query Challenge on LinkedIn, and something will surely pop up. I expect there are also some folks here who already participate in those and can attest to the effect that that has had on their learning curve. So just get in touch, people. Use the chat. All right. So what can you expect from this session? First of all, we're going to talk about my approach and problem breakdown to each of the scenarios. You'll probably meet some M functions that are not accessible through the ribbon, and we use list records and tables in ways you might not have seen before. Probably needless to say, yes, I will be writing M code, and I hope you are looking forward to that. One request, please keep questions in between the scenarios on topic. Save any off-topic questions you might have to the end of the presentation. Like Ken already mentioned, we'll try to stop at logical points so we can take a look at those questions you might have, and we can address those. So here we go. Let's take a look at our first scenario. So our first challenge is actually a question that was posed on the forum. So for each occurrence of an ID, for the first occurrence, we want to return a 1, and for all subsequent occurrences of that ID, we need to return a 0. Let's go to the Power Query editor. And I'll reference my query, so I'm going to right-click that, create a reference. That means that I am just referring to the output or the result of that query. I'm not copying any of the underlying M code. I'll disable that from load and I'll zoom in. There we go. It's a best practice, of course, to have the formula bar and the query settings pane visible at all times. So if you want to work along later and viewing this video back, make sure to do that. You can find them on the View tab right here. You can toggle them on. So we need to generate a value for each occurrence of an ID. And the first thing I want to do is generate a table with unique IDs. And to do that, we can use the group by function. So I'll right-click this column header, and I will go for group by. This dialog pops in, and all I want to do is segment my data. So the operation that I'm going to select is all rows. Let's rename the column, so we'll call that number, and press OK. This returns a nested table with all of the associated rows for that specific ID. So when I click off to the side in the white space, we can see a preview down below. And that preview has a limited view of the contents, but because there are only very few items here, we can see all of the contents. In this case, there are 3 rows. So in my view, a very important skill to have is the ability to transform lists in the M language. Although you will never load a list to the data model, they are often used for intermediate calculations and serve as arguments to other functions. If we look at the formula bar right now, we can already identify 3 lists. So the list initializer is the set of those curly brackets, and we can see that all of the key columns in the second argument of table.group are inside a list. All of the aggregate columns are within a list within a list. So we already have 3 lists here. Another thing to note about list is that the language specification describes lists as an ordered sequence of values. And that's something that we can leverage for this specific job. So here we go. I'm going to modify the code inside the formula bar. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list with that initial value. Using the list initializers, those curly brackets, I'm going to create a list with 1 value, and that's the value 1. That should be returned for each first occurrence of an ID. Now I can combine another list to the list that I've just created using the ampersand or combination operator. There we go. Let's remove this. I don't need that. Now we need to create a list that has a 0 in it for all of the remaining rows in the table. So here we go. List repeat. Select that. Again, I'm going to create a list using the list initializers, and I'm just going to put that 0 there. And then a count as number. So I can basically count all of the rows in the table and subtract 1. So table row count. Highlight that, press tab to select it. Refer to the underscore. So each item that returns the table. And subtract 1 from that value. I'll press that check mark. So we no longer have a table, but we now see a list. We had 3 items in our table, so we should have 3 items in this list as well. Awesome. So one more thing to do, and that's to expand these lists to new rows. Let's do that. With the expand column icon here, we'll expand that to new rows. Perfect. So in this example, you've seen that lists come in those list initializers, a set of curly brackets. Lists are often used as arguments to other functions, and lists consist of an ordered sequence of values. And combining lists is easy using the ampersand or combination operator. So let me know your thoughts and questions.
So far, I'm not seeing any questions showing up in the chat on this one, Melissa.
Awesome. All right, then we'll
just wow. That's the comment. Oh, David Johnson says he has a question. All right, let's see what David's question is. He says, why did the first value was it classed as 1?
Yeah, let me go back to the scenario. I'll close this. So we had to, right, that had to load. For each first occurrence, we had to return a 1. And for all subsequent occurrences of that same ID, we had to return a 0. So that's why I created a list with a single 1 and combined that with a list with a bunch of zeros. Does that answer your question? No.
David, is it easy for you to unmute and just ask? It might be easier than going through the chat window.
Yeah, sorry about that, and sorry for the capitals and no. I was not shouting at you, Melissa.
It's all good. We just assume you're passionate.
So maybe. So I missed the part, but when you're doing the code, I get that we return the first one as 1, the first instance is 1, and the rest are 0. I just missed the part why it adds 1 onto the first one and then returns zeros. I understand what you're doing, but why does 1 appear on the first item in the list and not the rest, if you follow?
Yeah, that's because a list is an ordered sequence of values. So that means the order is fixed within a list. Because I created an initial list that contained just one value, 1, and I combined that with the other list. The other list is automatically placed underneath that. It's stacking them on top of each other.
Okay.
So we're leveraging that property to create the result for this specific challenge.
Okay, great, perfect, thanks.
Awesome.
Melissa, Philip has also asked if you might be able to explain where the example comes from, what the specific use or client need was that actually drove this request.
I honestly don't know. It was a question on our forum. It really didn't state much more than this. It also didn't offer more details in the sample table, which makes it in itself a not very practical example, because it's more likely that there is other information there as well that we did not get. So yeah, I have nothing to offer there.
I laugh with that because, like, honestly, I mean, half the time when I'm writing something up, I'm like, well, I just got asked if it could be done. I don't know why you'd want to do it, but hey, I'll solve your problem for you. Why not, right?
Yeah.
Henry is asking, that only works if the initial list is sorted in the first place. Is that true?
No, because we're grouping the data. So we're bringing all of the rows that share that same ID together. And that's what we're leveraging. We're just creating a new list with values to replace that. And when it expands, it just expands for the number of elements in that list. So this will always work. It doesn't have to be sorted. It might have to be sorted depending on other data that we did not have. So yeah.
All right. Rob is asking, would this work the same if the table had many other columns of data?
To generate that value, yes, it would. You might have, like I said, you might have to sort then depending on what other information is present at the rows. So if there was a clear instance of the ID that had to come first, maybe had a date and a timestamp, then you have to sort on that. When you have that data sorted, then it doesn't matter. So you could sort that, but then you also have to bring that data back. We'll look at that second example in which I'm also bringing some data back. So hold your horses, we'll address that. It won't cover sorting, but it will cover bringing more data back.
Yeah, so Henry's got one final question on this one here about you don't return to the original order. So Henry, I would sort of say on that one, if the original order is something that's actually really important, what I would do personally is just add an index column before you group it, and then expand it back afterwards, and then you can resort by the index column, and you've got it all taken care of. So it's not out of the norm of stuff that does happen. Jason is asking, does the stacking logic carry through if you combine two lists, and is it based on what order you combine the lists?
Yeah, the order in which you combine the list and the order in which the values are in the list, that's the order that you're getting. So yeah,
Right.
the order is fixed within a list. If the list is evaluated, then the positions are fixed within the list.
Cool. All right, let's cut it for questions on this one, Melissa, unless you want more, and move on to the next one.
Yep, let's do that.
Okay, cool.
So we'll go back and take a look at our second scenario, and we'll take it one step further, because in this example, we will create a conditional index to a table. So we have a table here, and our custom index should restart for each ID and should begin in the row after the value in the days column hits 90 or above. After that, the index should just continue to run for that specific ID. So let's try to solve this one. Again, I'll reference my source query here. I'll rename that disable load and zoom in. There we go. So like in the first scenario, I will start by segmenting this data using the group by. So with that ID column selected, I'll go for group by and retrieve all of the rows. There we go. Now I can click off to the side so we can take a peek inside. Wonderful. So I already know that I'm going to need several steps to build out my full solution. And for that, you have two options. You can either create a let expression in which you can define variables and assign values to those, or you can create a record expression in which you can create fields and assign values to those. Personally, I find the record makes it very easy to review and to demonstrate because we can make all of the intermediate results visible. So I will go with a record. I'll open the advanced editor window, place that to the side somewhere here, zoom in this one as well. And after the each keyword, I'm just going to make some space And with those square brackets, I'm going to create a record. I'll press enter. Awesome. So we want to return a value for each row in this table. So my first question here is, how many rows do we have inside the table? I'll create a field called C. And we'll do a table row count again. So table row count. Look that up, press tab, pass in the underscore. Awesome. I can place a comment at the end, so I can create another field inside my record. And my next question is, where in the days column do we meet that 90-day criteria? Because the index that we need to add needs to start after value. So here we go. I'm going to call that n. And we're going to look for a position. So I'm going to use the function list position of. And this requires a list. So I can use the lookup operator to select a column from the table in a set of those square brackets. All I have to do is refer to that column name. So I'm going to refer to the days column here. And this will return a list. Now, as second argument, list position of, it wants a value as any. The challenge here is that we don't have a fixed value. It can be any number from 90 onwards. However, if we examine each individual item in our list, we can get a true or false response. So let's transform the contents in that days list. So we'll use list transform, select that. And for each element in my list, I want to know if that is greater than or equal to 90. And this can either return true or false. So for the matching condition in list position of, I can now look for the first value that equals true. So we'll enter a true here. Perfect. Now this returns the item where we find that value. And the index should start in the row below that. So I'm going to add 1 to the result of this. So +1, comma, and I can go to a new line. Because I've talked about adding an index, but I don't have an index. But that's easy to create. I'll call that I. We'll create a custom list that starts from 1. And we'll create an incremental sequential number for each row in the table. So I can enter the dot here and refer to my field name C that has the table row count. And I think I have all of the building blocks I require to build my result. So here we go. So list position of will actually return -1 if a value isn't found. Now that's perfectly fine because -1 is not a valid list position, but because I'm adding 1 back, because I need to offset that value, that -1 will be turned into a 0, which is a valid list position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement some condition here to see if there is a valid value for n. Here we go. If n is greater than 0, that means that somewhere in my days column, we will find a value which is equal to or greater than 90. Then I want to create a list with nulls until that point. So list repeat. Create a list again. This time we will enter a null value and we'll repeat that n times. Should place the keyword then there first. Awesome. And now we have a partial list with nulls, and we can append our index to that. So the combination operator and refer to I. Of course, this will return a list that has more elements than there are rows inside my table. So we need to limit the items we're returning in this list. Here we go. List first n. And we want the number of elements to be exactly like the number of rows in our table. So we refer to C. Else, if there is no valid value for n, that means no match was found, so there is no value greater than or equal to 90, then we can just create a list that contains only null values for each row in the table. So list repeat. Again, create a list that contains a null value, and we'll repeat that for each row in the table. So I'm going to refer to C. As a final result, as you now see, we just have the ID column here in the table, but we want to bring back the days column as well as our result column that we just built. So here we can create a table from those two columns. I'll call that T. We'll create a table from columns. This wants lists as a list, so I'll use the list initializers again, and I can pass in the list now. So I can look up the days list again with those square brackets. See, it's not typing. There we go. Refer to days. That returns a list with those values, comma, and I can refer to my result. So the list R. And I can also give my new columns a name. So I've created a table with, or I'm creating a table with two columns, and we'll call that first column days and the second one output. So I don't need that. You can remove that. There we go. And let's just take a look at the record. So here we go. I'm going to press done. Instead of a table, we now have a record. Let's click off to the side. We see some values here, but because we also have some structured values there, I can't click to that level. So I'm just going to drill down into one record. So our table had 7 rows, and we're returning 5 nulls. After that, our index should start. This index is just a list of numbers from 1 all the way up to 7. Then we created our result list, and with that list, we brought back the values in the days column and appended the output to that. So we created a table. Let's X out this step. And to retrieve that table from the record, all we have to do is use field access. So instead of square brackets, we can refer to the field name. So I'm going to look at the closing bracket of my record, add another set of square brackets here, and refer to that field name T. Let's press that check mark. This returns the table. Let's click off to the side. There it is. And we can just expand that. So with those sideward arrows, bring back those columns. So in this example, we've seen the record initializer. That's a set of those square brackets. The square brackets are also used for lookup, field selection, and field access. Lists with incremental values can be created using the dot dot, and list values can be transformed into something else with a function called list.transform. And finally, we've also seen how to construct a table from 2 columns. So any questions on this?
There's a collection of exploding head emojis.
Oh, that's nice.
I don't think that counts as a question so much, but one comment that was made, Melissa, and I'm curious as to your opinion on this one here. So the comment was, I can see where code documentation can be very important for transferability and maintainability. And I'm curious if you have any solutions or thoughts around that kind of stuff, because I mean the stuff that you've done here is like, man, it's mind blowing. But I think that's kind of the point, is it's mind blowing, right? So if you hand it to someone else, they need to maintain it. What do you do, or how do you actually make that handoff? Do you have any thoughts on that at all, or no?
I have thoughts on that, but thoughts not the issue. No, you have to document. Yeah, but I think in general, we should, as users, not only focus on the front end, but try to get a handle on the language itself. I think we need to do both. So I'm trying to be an advocate to get more people to fall in love with the language, because it's pretty awesome. And I'm just hoping that this will contribute. I know it's not an answer to the question, but yeah, we should definitely invest and get more people involved in learning to speak M. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I've always felt with some of this stuff that, I think what makes Power Query such an incredibly successful program is the fact that you can do so much by clicking buttons without actually having to write the language on this. And I mean, my sort of feeling with a lot of this is, when you learn M, you can actually take it obviously to a deeper level. But I hope that the Power Query team uses that to look at the examples that people are building this way, to build them a user interface to be able to do it, so you don't actually have to write the code per se. And that way, it would give that ability to make that handoff and documentation a lot easier in the grand scheme of things. However, until we get there, I mean, I agree. It's helpful when people learn it. The scary part is, I mean, there's some comments in here about no documentation equals job security, which is very true, I guess. But although I got to tell you, I've seen instances where that actually led to a loss of job security because of that. But yeah, so. Some other comments here. This is like a good magic show. I see how it's being done, but I don't believe what I see. I love it. You did this last time, Melissa. You blew people's minds with what you're showing here. So,
awesome.
Yeah, I think most of it. I mean, the best. The questions are, how do you actually learn it? Where do you find some resources? And here's a technical question related to this particular one. Can you explain why output for row 13 is null and 18 and 19 have 2 and 3?
Let's see. Oh, right here. You mean this one?
So
it's this ID. It's sent 1058. So it has. We need to start the index in the row after the value hits 90 or above for the first time. So for this specific ID, this is where we hit that value, which is greater than. So the index should start here. And when you look at the example above, that's where you hit 90. So that's equal to 90. So our index should start after that. Doesn't matter which value comes after. The index should just kick in and keep running until the end of, for all of the lines that follow.
Perfect. All right. Just see if I can't figure out what's going on with some microphones in here. All right. I'm trying to think. Yeah, so Rizwan said on row 13, the data shows a 0. And I think, that's because it's a new index number there. So, or a new ID number. It's a new product.
Yeah.
So it's starting the series over again. Yeah.
Restarting
okay, that makes
again.
sense.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any other questions in here. Just I mean, more about, where are the resources to be able to learn M to this particular level of depth?
Yeah. My advice, it's where I started off. It's getting stuck in. And I think participating in challenges, just, I don't know, practice on a daily basis from somewhere between 10 to 30 minutes. And those challenges are excellent for that. You will pick up so incredibly much, because You have your own approach, how you dissect a problem, how you solve that. So that will get you into the M mindset, but you also get to explore the solution provided by others. So there are a lot of people who resort to coding now and then, and you can try to dissect what's happening in their solution. But because it's on LinkedIn, just ask a question if you don't understand it. It's awesome. I think it's a great community out there. I think every solution provided is celebrated and really appreciated. So yeah, just go out there and explore and have fun.
I'm just going to follow up on something that Ebenezer just posted in the chat here. Is that I need a place to start with the basics of M. And Ebenezer, just because you'd asked about this earlier, you asked for a link to my book. I would say that if you start with my book, that will actually give you the understanding of what is the structure, what is a table, what's a record, what is a list, what are these components, what do these square braces indicate versus curly braces. Once you work your way through those chapters, then from there, I 100% agree that that'll give you the base knowledge you need, so that when you then start going and tackling your challenges, like Melissa's suggesting here, at that point you recognize what this language is actually trying to tell you, because those square braces and those curly braces mean very, very different things, and you got to use them in the right place. But once you've got the understanding of what those actually mean, at that point you can now not only start writing your own code, trying and failing, okay, but eventually getting success. But then you can start to read other people's code and see how it actually goes different. But that's sort of the basic language index, I guess, that I would recommend to sort of start with on that one. So
yeah.
We got some more approaches on this one here, just on your daily challenges. Nick said he really liked my monkey shorts today for working with text.combine. Christian advocates both your and my courses. Love that. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
And Brian Julius is asking, how much do you think about performance as you're crafting your solutions?
How much do I think about it? Performance, it's always about finding a solution first, and performance comes when there's a need to do something about the performance of the query itself. So I'm really not too bothered with that when I'm trying to design a solution. Not at first. So unless I know up front that performance is an issue, then I will definitely start with a different mindset. But when it's not in play, it's all about finding a solution for me, and I don't initially focus on performance that much. Although I do by now, through experience, know some things perform better than other approaches. So I tend to go down a different route. Yeah.
I got to just tell you, my friend, I 100% agree with you, because the net performance on something that doesn't have a solution is zero.
Yeah.
So it's answer the question first and then try and figure out, okay, well, that was too slow. Let me see if I can find a faster way. But ultimately, you get paid for results up front, and then you can get the budget to increase the performance after the fact. But the results are the most important, in my opinion. So anyway, I think that's it for questions on this one. Do you want to move on to your next one?
Yeah. Let's do that. Here we go. I'll close and load this, and we'll take a look at another scenario. So this one, by the way, this one was a challenge that came from LinkedIn. And so is the next one. This also was a LinkedIn challenge from Excel BI. He's awesome, by the way, VJ. He posts a daily challenge for you to get stuck in, which is just awesome. On weekdays, there are Excel challenges, but most of the time you can solve those with Power Query as well. So this is the magic square, and we need to determine for each square, which has as many columns as it has rows, if all of the sums of the rows and the columns, but also the diagonals, add up to 15. If that is the case, then we have a magic square and we should return the value true. So we have a data set that has a couple of columns here, and those should be turned into 4 squares and can return these values. So there we go. Let's go to the Power Query editor. and I'll right click and reference that. There we go. Just disable load for this. Zoom in. So this will require most of the techniques we've seen so far and a bit more. Yeah, the first thing I want to know, because now we have one giant table that has 3 columns and 12 rows, but we need to limit the number of rows in these tables, or we need to create tables and limit the rows in those, and they should be as many rows as we have columns, in this case 3. So let's create a variable for the column count. Just add that here. So table column count. Look that up, press tab to select it, wrap that around it and press that check mark. So this returns the value 3. Awesome. Now I already know that I'm going to need a zero-based index as well to access rows and columns. So for that, I'll create a variable as well. So I'm going to create a custom list here. It's going to start from 0 all the way up to the number of columns I have in my table, -1, because we're starting from 0 this time. So this should return a list with 3 elements. Here we go. My elements are 0, 1, and 2. Let's rename these. So this is our column count. I'll call that I. Let's create one more step here. Rename that as well. We'll call that result. And instead of I, we will be returning the source table. There we go. So, like I said, we have one table now with 3 columns and 12 rows. We need to split that up. So inside the formula bar, I'm going to look for the function table split. Just look that up. There it is. Press tab, wrap that around it, and it wants a page size. So how many rows to keep in each of the tables? And we can refer to the column count. Press that check mark. Perfect. So this returns a list with nested tables for that column or for that table that we just had. And when I click off to the side, this now returns a table with just 3 rows. Again, a table with 3 rows, and so on. Perfect. So aggregate functions are all list operations in the M language. You have a list.count, a list.max, but also a list.sum, for example. So if we want to sum up values in all of the columns and all of the rows, ideally we want to break this table apart into a set of lists. Let's take a look at that. So I'll right-click beside that first table and I'll add it as a new query. There we go. I'll create a manual step. And in the previous example, we've seen that we could create a table from columns. Let's see if we can create a list if we transform it to columns instead. So table to columns, there is an M function like that. Perfect. Now let's see what this does. So it returns a list with nested list for each of the columns in my table. And not only that, but the order is exactly the same as the column order was in the table. So this first list item, that is the first column in my table. So 8, 3, 4. Let's take a peek. 8, 3, 4. Awesome. Let's rename this. 2 columns. Just going to leave there for your reference. disable load. Let's duplicate this. So I'll duplicate that. That means the underlying M code is duplicated as well. And let's see if there's a function table to rows. Press that check mark. Nothing changed because we have an equal amount of rows as columns in our table. Let's click off to the side in the white space. So 816, let's take a look. That should be the first row, and it is. Awesome. So let's rename this as well. 2 rows. Perfect. So we are now able to split up our table into a list with lists for each of the columns and lists for each of the rows that we can sum up. Let's step back. And I'll click off to the side so we get that additional preview down below. Let's open the advanced editor window. And let's zoom in. So the end result here should be a true or false if all of the conditions are met, if we have that magic square. So this table value should then be transformed into either true or false. So we're going to transform the contents in this list. So list transform. Open that up. Let's move this to a new line, comma, and for each of the tables there, we are going to do something. Now, I am going to break this apart into very small pieces because there are a lot of things at play. And although originally I didn't write it like this, I am just going to create a record so we can look back and review each of the individual components if you have questions about that later. So I'm going to create a record here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is bring in that table. This is just for reference. I don't actually require it, but there we go. I'm going to call my field name T and assign that the underscore. So with that each expression here, I'm accessing the table from this list. So that's the value that I'm bringing in. Let me take a zip. And the next thing that I want to do is create a calculation for each of the columns in that table. So I'll create a field called columns. And we've already seen that with that two columns function, we could get a list containing a list for each of the columns, right? So we are going to leverage that. If that list is returned, then we have to sum them up. So again, we have to transform a list here. So list transform. This requires a list as a list. So here I'm going to use table to columns. I'm going to pass in the underscore, so I'm accessing the table here, bringing that in, and this will return a list with a list for each of the column values, right? Then we can say, hey, we want to sum up the values in all of those lists that we've just returned. So list sum, look that up, pass in the underscore, perfect. Now the underscore here is referring to each expression here, which is accessing each of the lists that this expression returns. So I think that might be confusing. So what I'm going to do is instead of the each expression here, I'm just going to create a function expression to assign my variable a different name. So the function will remain the same, it's just going to be easier to refer to those items separately. So instead of the each keyword, in a set of parentheses, we'll add the go-to sign. And now inside those parentheses, I can create a variable. I'm going to call that x. That will refer to each of the lists that make up the columns. And I can refer to that in list.sum. So the result is 3 values for each of the columns, the column totals, if you will. And we need to see if that value is equal to 15. So here we'll say equals 15. So the columns list here will return a list with 3 true or false values for each of the columns in the table. Let's do the same for the rows. So we'll add a comma here. Rows. Again, we're going to blow up that table, right? And then we're going to transform those values. So list transform. But this time we'll turn that table into rows. So table 2 rows. Bring in the table with the underscore, comma, create a function. There we go, with a single argument. List sum. We'll sum up the values for all of those rows. And we'll ask the question again, are you equal to 15? So this was actually the easy part, because columns and rows, those are the building blocks for each table. For the diagonal, we have to resort to something which is called item access by retrieving a specific item from a list with its zero-based index. And that's where my custom list I comes in, because that has just 3 values, a 0, a 1, and a 2. Let's take a look. Again, we're going to transform that list. This time we will transform the list I that has my zero-based indexes. And for each of that items, for each item in that list, we are going to look up a specific value from a table. So first, we're going to break that table apart again. I'll use table 2 columns, pass in the underscore to bring in the table from this list. And then I can use the positional index operators in a set of those curly brackets to access the item. So I'm going to refer to my list item with the X here. Now this returns the column 1. So here we go. So our list with indexes contains 3 values. The first value is a 0. If I split up my table, the first item in my list, that's column 1, because the order is fixed. The second item in that list is column 2, and so on. Now, because table 2 columns returns a list with lists, I've extracted column 1 as a list. So I can use item access again to retrieve a specific value. So in another set of those curly brackets, I'm going to enter an X once more, and that means from column 1, I'm extracting the first value. So for my initial value here in the list, that null, that gets transformed into an 8. If we take a look at the second item in my list, which is a 2, that returns the second column of my table and the second value. The final value in my list returns the last column and the last value from that row. Awesome. So this returns a value, a list of values with the numbers 8, 5, and 2. And we can sum these up. So we'll wrap list sum around that. And we can ask that question again. Are you equal to 15? Let's copy this. Paste that back. And try to find a solution for the second diagonal as well. So the second diagonal runs in the opposite direction. And we've seen that lists are an ordered sequence of values. And when you use the function table to columns, the columns are listed in the same order as they were in the table. So if we reverse the contents of that list, then we should get the reversed order as well. So let's do that. List reverse. Add the closing bracket there. And that means the column order that's returned by table to columns is now column 3, column 2, column 1. So looking at our list, we're using the 0, the initial item in my list. We're accessing column 3, position 1. For the second item, again, column 2, position 2. And for the final item in my list, we're accessing column 1, the final value. Awesome. So now all we have to make sure is that we see if all of the values are true, because if that's the case, then we've identified that magic square. So here we go, our results, list all true. This just takes one single argument, a list. So columns returns a list, we can refer to that. We can use the combination operator to append the rows list to that as well. And we need to create a custom list for the diagonals because that returns just either true or false. So create a list and pass in those values for the diagonal 1 and the diagonal 2. There we go. And I should probably add a closing parentheses there. All right. Let's take a look at the record that we just created. So I'll press down. Click off to the side. So here's the table that we're bringing in. Then we have columns as a list. This just contains true or false values. Same for the rows. Then we have the diagonals. And finally, the result. So the result is true. That means all of the list items in the columns and the rows are true for this first table as well. Let's return that value. So after the closing parentheses of the bracket, I'm going to use field selection to select the field R. All right, perfect. So in this example, we've seen that tables can be broken apart into lists of rows and lists of columns. We've also had our fair share of item access, which allows you to access items in a list based on its zero-based position. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about some of the concepts and techniques in M. Do let me know.
I'm just laughing because I'm looking at the number of exploding head emojis has increased exponentially.
Right.
Listen, I've got a question for you on this one here. I would like to know, from the time that you first saw this challenge, I presume you've not worked with magic squares before. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I never had a use to do that in business myself. How long did it take you to create the solution, actually get it working the first time through?
It probably took me 15 minutes because I had a clear idea of how I wanted to do it. So what I'm doing now is basically what I did the first time around.
Okay, you're insane, dude. That is amazing. Like, honestly, this would take me hours. So
Yeah.
I'm impressed. Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I'm just trying to scan back the list. Yeah, 15 days. I agree, Kathy. I think I'm probably in the same ballpark here. And I mean, I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with Power Query, but that is wow, that is just incredible. But I mean, you've got some crazy. I mean, it's interesting, sort of looking at, and not even just like the code aspects of it, but just the logic of how to go through and sort of build your functions up to do this kind of stuff is I don't know. I'm glad I'm an accountant. All I got to do is add and subtract things. It makes my life easy. But anyhow, I'm just trying to figure out if there was any questions that I missed along the way here on this. A lot of comments about how blown away people are on this kind of stuff, and just the general consensus is that. So, have I missed anything? Did anybody seem like? If I've missed any questions, please throw them into the chat, because I have missed them. So, yeah, sort of was an accountant. I don't do as much accounting anymore, Oscar, but that is certainly my background. Yes. So, and you know, I always joke that the hardest math that an accountant has to do is subtract two items from each other, and that's basically it. So, but yeah, that David, that's a good question. Melissa, was that 15 Earth minutes or on some other time continuum? So. Awesome. One question from Mark. He says, it looks like you assume that there were only ever the correct number of rows for each of the magic squares.
Let's see. Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
So if what would happen if the how easy would it be for you to adjust your solution? I guess if I can sort of paraphrase this, but how easy would it be for you to adjust the dimensions of your solution? And then what would happen if one of those tables came in with the wrong number of rows?
Yeah, the wrong numbers of rows, that would cause issues. Because I'm using item access, I could change that to optional item access, but that would return a null. So it will definitely be more challenging to do so. It is kind of dynamic because I am using the column count. So if at one point the columns would be 4 columns wide and 4 rows long, for example, it would still work. So yeah, that would work. But if there's an inconsistent number of rows, I would be able to fix that. But yeah, let's keep the magic in the magic square and make sure that you have the right number of rows. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I don't see. Ron says start with a step to check if the rows count is a multiple of the column count. Yeah. The only trick with that one, Ron, is you'd have to find somehow to, if you got a bunch of, if there was just one missing row in the center, you'd have to figure out which one it was and how did it actually, you know, adjust the data set. And that would be the tricky part. But I mean, I think it's also fair to say, though, that if you're building a solution like this, you know, you would expect that there's certain parameters that some of the stuff would come in consistently, or you'd have rules to set it there. Mark says, so to fix it, it would take you an extra 3 minutes. Exactly. There you go.
Just
awesome.
about. Yeah, just about.
A blank value in any of the squares, it would still work?
A blank value as in a null or as in a text representative?
A missing value, I guess, in the middle of one of the squares, somebody didn't fill in one of the squares.
Yeah. As long as we could get that into a number type, then it wouldn't fall over. If it was a null, summing up things with nulls, that doesn't go so well. So yeah, we'd have to do some work about that.
I'd have a safety step on there.
Yeah, you could test for that before you even begin, so it shouldn't be that hard. Again, sorry.
Or just take the original columns and convert any nulls to zeros before you start. I mean, that takes care of it. Doesn't even need the test, right? So I think, Mark, I have faith that Melissa could fix that in a lot less than 2 minutes. I really do. So there you go. All right. I don't see any other questions coming. Do you have another example that you wanted to go through?
Let's see. I do have an example that I kind of kept as a spare if everyone's still looking forward to this and wants to
I mean,
Wants me to
we
have a
can
go?
ask if people want to stick around and see another example. Okay, yeah, we got more. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, yeah. I think that they would like to see another example. They'll take everything you can give them. For those of you who
All
do
right.
have to drop, remember we are recording this, so this will get posted on the YouTube channel within the next 48. So if you can't stick around, then you know you're not going to miss it. You can always pick it. Yeah, there's definitely a request for more voodoo. Yes. So there you go. Awesome. I will turn it over to you and let you do the spare.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So the final one, don't have a slide for that. We'll just have to take a peek at the data. Let's make that a bit smaller. And let's just refer to it. So I'll reference this again. So this will be our solution 4. So what we are looking at now is stack data. So we have 3 rows of data, and a set of column pairs belongs together. So column A and column B belong together. We have the initial here, and then it's followed by a word that starts with that letter. We also have a bunch of nulls somewhere in between, but column A, column B belong together. Then the next set of columns belongs together as well. And that goes on all the way until we reach the end. So there are column pairs that makes this for me actually a perfect data set. I know it sounds strange when I say it like that, but to me, when I took a look at this was perfect data. It's very consistent. So let's try. I'll try to explain what I mean by that. So not only do the 2 adjacent columns belong to each other, the values are also sharing the same line. And it's very consistent that way. The initial is always in the left column and the word is always to the right. So let's create a manual step. And again, we'll explode this data into a list with columns. So table, 2 columns, there we go. Just wrap that around it and press that check mark. And this returns a list with all of the columns in the table that we've already seen. We've already seen as well that the order in which the columns are placed within the list is fixed. So we can use that to design a solution. So here we go. I'll open the advanced editor window just for my convenience, and I'll zoom in. There we go. Let's call this results. And let's return that as well. Perfect. So we have a list and we can look specific values up inside the list. Now each odd row contains the initials and each even row contains the words. And knowing that makes this very simple to solve. We'll call the function called list alternate. Past that our list, and then it wants a count as number. And that is the number of values to skip each time. I want to skip just 1 item in this list. So I'll enter a 1 here, comma, repeat interval. So that's the number of items to keep in between the skipped items. That's a 1 as well. And finally, it wants to know an offset. So where in the list do you want to start with applying that pattern? I want to start at the top of my list. So I'll close off this function and let's see what this returns. So it returns a list with fewer items. I'll click off to the side beside the first list and it has the initials. And the same is true for the second list. So all of these lists contain initials. Now we can expand these using a function called list combine. So inside the formula bar, list combine, and press that check mark. Now to construct a list with all of the values for the columns that contain the words, all we have to do is omit the starting position. So if we omit this and press that check mark, we now have the words. And it's very easy to construct a table again. So here we go. I'll open the advanced editor window. Zoom back in. We'll create a table from columns. So table from columns. This wants lists as a list, like we've seen before. So I'm going to create a list and just cut this, Control X, paste that here, and add back that starting position. So we start with the list that has the initials in them, comma. Then we'll create a list with all of the words. And we have those nulls in here as well. So we can also solve that. We can remove the nulls. So list remove nulls, just wrap that around it. We'll do that here as well. List remove nulls. Awesome. Let's give these columns names as well. So we have the initial. And we have the word. Close off our function. And let's press that check mark. So instead of, let's bring back the query settings. Instead of this jumble, we now have a perfect tabular data set with just a few lines of M. So this was the bonus. Hope everyone enjoyed this.
So I have a pattern to do this without writing any code, which is kind of interesting. But here's a question we've got, and this one I was just sort of messing with this on myself, just trying to figure this out. So why is the top of the list 1, not 0? And I'm going to throw that out to you to give an answer on. So why is that the case?
That's why. That's the nice. Inconsistent part, I think, that we have, where when you apply item access, lists are zero-based, and you need to refer to the zero-based position. But when you refer to a list item in a function like this, you need to refer to the first item in the list, which is at the zero-based index of a list. It is inconsistent, but that's just how it is. If you have a better explanation, please share it.
Well, what I would say on this one is actually, if you add an index column to this table, you'll see exactly the same thing, right? The table actually displays with a 1 as the first row. And if you look at your list items, they will display as a 1 as the first row. But if you're trying to access the first item of the table, you have to refer to the table's 0 property, and the same is true of the list. It works the same way. Everything is 0-based. They just put a 1 on there to make you more comfortable, I guess, as a person, right? So,
but it is confusing.
Yes, yeah, it's one of those weirdness things that you got to get used to in Power Query. And from a complete and technical point, the number line should start at 0, but that's not the way humans generally think, right? So, but there you go. Any other questions that we had? And I don't see any other questions on that one. Yeah, no, cool stuff. Melissa, once again, I mean, thanks for doing this stuff. I mean, the command that you have of this language is amazing. Actually, I don't remember if I asked you this last time, but I am kind of curious to know, is M your first coding language, or have you worked with other coding languages before?
No, I don't have a programming background. I'm just an Excel user who thinks Power Query is amazing. So yeah.
So it is the first coding language you've worked with, and the reason why I asked that question, I'm always curious on this. When I see people who have just this unbelievable command of Power Query's coding language, I usually find that it's their first coding language. And when I find people who've actually started coding in a different language, they struggle with the M language a lot more. And I will certainly say from my own perspective that is the case for me. My first coding language that I really used in earnest was VBA. So because it's so different, I always try to think about the VBA aspects and try and translate them to Power Query. You don't have that. You treat this as natively, and it's interesting to sort of see how. I wish I knew MAM the way you do. Honestly, I mean, this is incredible. So, yeah, really, really awesome stuff. Ron says, time to award you the pointy hat, a wizard's cloak, and a wand. There you go. You have been crowned with virtual hardware here.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah.
Now, listen, Melissa. Once again, I really appreciate having you come to this stuff. The stuff that you show is amazing. This is just, I mean, it's so cool, and to be able to see what you can do with just a good solid command of this language is incredible. I really appreciate the work that you put into this stuff, and yeah, it's amazing. But we're definitely going to get you back in version. I love statements like, "Let's see if there's a function for that." Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this session for me was all about trying to introduce some of the concepts and the key techniques in the M language, and I do absolutely recognize that I had to go through that in lightning speed. But I just hope that the examples make it a little more relatable, so you know what's happening, and hopefully when you look at it again, something will make sense. So I'm just hoping that people will pick up more about the language itself, because it's truly amazing.
I always say with these kind of sessions that these sessions are not teaching sessions, they're demo sessions, right? It's about inspiration and whatever else. I mean, if you really want to learn this stuff to a deep degree, that's when you go and take a course, right? And yep. I mean, obviously, I mean, I have one at SkillWave. Melissa's got her own, and I would say, like, learn it. And my philosophy is learn it from someone who you connect with and really like their stuff. And I would highly recommend what Melissa does. I think is amazing. So definitely go and check that kind of stuff out. Let me see. Yep. Okay. So there's just a comment sort of to sort of kind of, I guess, add some validity to my side from the programmers thing. When you learn one language, you're translating to another. I mean, it's obviously the trick is become fluent in one as your first language, a lot of time and practice, and then eventually, hopefully, you can set aside some of those predisposed notions is where you go. But yeah, no, once again, very, very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. Are there any other questions for Melissa before we let her go here, or is excellent presentation, of course, as always from Melissa. We expect nothing less. Awesome. I think what we'll do then is where can we follow Melissa? Melissa, do you have a slide for your social media contacts and everything else that you want to throw up to close this out here?
Yeah. So, right, click too early. There we go. That's my LinkedIn handle. You can find me there. I do try to post something about DM language once a week, usually over the weekends. So yeah, if you want to reach out, I'm always happy to connect with everyone. So please get in touch.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thanks again so much for coming and doing this. This is a great way to round out our penultimate session for the year on this. I'm really happy to have you back, and we'll definitely be in touch to see if we can get you to do something again next year. It's hard to believe that it's almost the end of the year, isn't it? On that note, I think I'm going to stop the recording for today, and yeah, hopefully we'll see all of you at the next meetup. If not, best wishes for a safe and happy holiday season, and we'll see you all back in 2023, if not before.